The question I'm going to ask today, Dad, Papa, is...
The question that we're going to talk about is...
What is the most scared I've ever been? That one leapt off the page for me.
What was my first big trip?
How was the day of your wedding?
I'm going to talk about how I almost died twice in 2 years.
She was telling me her life story, and she didn't know it was me.
That is an absolutely true story.
And I can tell you about it.
Welcome to the Storyworth Podcast. I'm your host, Krista Baum, co-founder of Storyworth. So glad you're with us today. If you're new to Storyworth, we help people write their life stories, the big stories and the small ones. Each week on the podcast, we ask questions that help us hold on to a person's life story and get to know our loved ones better. Today on the show, a son asks his father about growing up in Jamaica and a plane ride that has lingered with both men for much of their lives.
So I'll tell you, my father went to Princeton when he was 16 years old from Jamaica. And at this period, this is also a period of sort of political turmoil in Jamaica. So I knew this story and I wanted my father to elaborate on it. So I probably asked him something of the sort of what was the story for you and our family around that time.
Can you introduce yourselves? Maybe your name, where you're from, how old you are, what you do?
So my name is Mark. I'm officially George Winchester Mark Jobson. I live in Lake Hill, New York, upstate New York, but I'm from Jamaica, born and bred in Jamaica.
Ryan, how about you?
So I'm Ryan Jobson. I'm Mark's son. I am 34 years old. I was born in upstate New York, and I was always sort of brought up with a sensibility of my father being from Jamaica and being from the Caribbean, which led me on my own lifelong journey in the study of the Caribbean as well.
Oh, amazing. What do you do now?
I'm now a professor of anthropology at the University of Chicago, where I specialize in the study of the Caribbean and extractive economies and climate change. So yeah, it's quite a career that was sparked in many ways by my upbringing.
What made you two want to start documenting your family stories when you did?
I had not some major medical crisis in 2021 where basically my heart stopped. I had a cardiac arrest right here in the same house I'm in now, and I survived it. My wife did CPR, and the rescue squad was fairly fast, and they shocked my heart back to life. And I had a long recovery. I had a long time in the hospital and rehab and physical therapy and cognitive and all that. But about a year after that, I was doing a lot better. And I think my son Ryan kind of saw that this would be something that would also stimulate my thinking and feeling of self-worth too. So I think that's kind of what led up to it. Is there more you have to add, Ryan?
A lot of this really did sort of emerge out of my father's hospitalization. So I think this was clearly a medical trauma for you, Dad, but also for us. There was this sense that life is very precarious, right? And when you came out of the hospital, I should also add, you were saying that you were struck by these very vivid memories of your childhood. So there was a desire there to get these stories down, some of which I had heard before piecemeal, but others that were sort of coming through even more vividly.
What a fascinating side effect of this trauma, to have these early memories come back so vividly. Let's set the scene for this story. Can you tell me, what was the Jamaica of your youth like?
It was a place kind of pulled in many ways. I was born right about when Jamaica became independent from Great Britain. So I was born in 1960, and we became independent in 62. So I was exactly 2 years and a few months when we became independent. So Jamaica was a society in transition for my whole childhood, my first 16 years that I lived there. the Jamaicans had self-respect, but there was a lot of years and a lot of centuries of being made to think you were less than. One of the aspects of that was the whole race and color thing, because it was a thing in Jamaica.
How did your family fit into the larger story of Jamaica at that time?
Well, in my particular case, I grew up way out in the country, so about as little to do as you could with the capital city, Kingston. So my family was more kind of well off by far than the average. They weren't the wealthiest of people, but we were, both my parents had good jobs. My mother was a teacher in high school. My father worked for a multinational, Reynolds Aluminum. He was a farms manager for a good portion of their farms. And so my family was fairly well off, but there's also, like I was saying, it's not so much only the wealth, as in wealth and money. It's what your links were to people of power, and also your links were to people of prestige, which probably was the ultimate thing. And that had a lot to do with whether your family connections and your family history and who your parents and grandparents and their ancestors were. But that was being fought against a lot by people all over, but particularly people who were of the black majority, who had been told that they were not as good as the wealthy elite, which were a very small number of whites and a kind of medium amount of mixed race people who looked kind of white. So yeah, that was a change that people were kind of struggling against at the time.
So someone like my father might be classified as Jamaica white at different moments, and he can speak to this, might have also been called red or brown, depending on the context.
And in fact, I got into a lot of fights, and most of the fights were caused by being taunted or teased, called names. And I had a temper, I still do. And I'd react and I'd start swinging the fists and, I'd ask, I wore glasses. I just started wearing glasses. So I'd say, hold my glasses to one of my other kids around, and I'd start swinging the fist, and I usually ended up on the wrong end of the fight, but I fought almost every day. So that was the deal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You ultimately decided to move to America. Can you tell me more about that choice?
So it was a choice for education. Here was Mark, who was, getting first or second place in his classes all the way along and busted out, the school leaving exams. They call it General Certificate of Education. I did the best in the island with almost all distinctions, ended up with another series of exams, which I also did the best in a generation in my country. Everyone saw that I had the gifts to do well in school anywhere I wanted to go. So America's fairly close. We had been to America several times on visits. I kind of thought, let's apply to some of these better colleges in the U.S. So I applied to maybe 3 Ivy League schools like Harvard, Princeton. So I did that, and I picked the one that I thought I would like the best, not having been to any of them. Also, I was only 16.
16 is so young to leave home, especially for another country, right? So were you nervous? How were you feeling?
I wasn't arrogant, but I was very confident. I was 14 when I graduated high school, the regular high school. So having had 2 more years to live, at 16, I felt like a young adult. And certainly when I got to Princeton, I felt a little young. I knew I was the second youngest person there, but I didn't feel like I stuck out for age reasons.
Okay, so you felt prepared.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell me the story about your flight to America and the record player?
So here's the story. After my first semester abroad in Princeton, at Christmas time or at December, you have the Christmas break. So it was a fairly long break the way Princeton did it. So I was home by mid-December, and I think I was home till mid-January the way Princeton's system was. So my first time home in 3 months, and I returned having at least experienced a few months in America. But Jamaica was at a critical point, 1976. fall of 76, the government of Michael Manley had already completed their first term. There was a lot of political polarization. One side hated the other side hated back. Even before I left Princeton to come back, I kept in touch enough with what was going on in Jamaica to hear that there was an election coming up, and it was really a high pressure one. Both sides felt they had to win. It was tense. Violence was growing. You had Bob Marley, the reggae star, was reaching his superstar rank, and he decided to do a concert called the Smile Jamaica concert to kind of bring peace, if he could, to the destructive feeling of division that was going on. I should say this, that my parents, who were well off enough to have a few thousand, or, perhaps maybe close to 100,000 in U.S. currency, wanted to get some of their assets out because they thought that Jamaica was heading down the socialist path fast, and that maybe in a year or two it would be pretty much communist. So they wanted to see if they could migrate and hopefully get some of their assets out of Jamaica, which many Jamaicans who had the money were trying to do. A lot of Jamaicans would just try to get hold of U.S. currency bills, $20, $100 bills, whatever. You could get them on the black market for not a huge markup, so you have to pay more than they were worth, but you'd be glad to get the U.S. currency. The question is how to get it out of Jamaica. So while I was there over the Christmas break, my parents, they didn't have a huge amount of cash on them, but they wanted to get enough out with me so that I could have a little bit of spare money in America and maybe begin for them to have some in America too. So my mom came up with this plan that she would get some U.S. currency into a reggae record album on the old LPs. And this was a fold-out LP that if you carefully slit the side that did not have the record in it, if you carefully slit down that, you could separate the kind of cardboard panel, and you could slip cash into that and then reseal it carefully.
Do you remember how much cash they were trying to slip in?
In this case, it was between 2,000 and 3,000. So it wasn't a massive, which was good because even with thin bills, you didn't want it to bulge or show. So it was a relatively small amount. So my mother, tried a few times, probably with, I don't know exactly if she tried other albums, but she made it work, and it was good, well hidden, this money. So that was part of my suitcase that I was taking with me going back home to Princeton. When we got to the airport, it go through the immigration and customs or whatever you go through leaving, and I'm sitting in the departure lounge, and I have a little boombox with me, and I had maybe not much else possessions-wise, maybe a book or whatever I had in my hand. So as I sit there in the departure lounge, up come to me two uniformed police officers. They had on the khaki uniform, which gives you an idea. They had the higher rank in Jamaica. The khaki clothes police are the higher ranks, like inspectors or whatever. So two men came up to me. I'm sitting there just minding my business, and they walk up to me and say, Mr. Jobson. And I said, what's up?
How did you feel when these inspectors came up to you and singled you out?
Scared as shit for so many reasons. Just the appearance of police officers, because obviously when you see them, you figure you're doing something wrong. And I did know I was doing something wrong because it was illegal to ship out currency without declaring it. So it was, I knew I was doing something illegal. So it was scary. They just looked at my boots, and they said, take those off. So I took off the winter boots, and they kind of felt around in them to see if there was any stuff stuck in them or hid away in them. And they said, okay, you can put them back on. And then they looked at my boombox, a little boombox, and they said, make it play. they just wanted to make sure that it wasn't just solidly stuffed with money, I guess. So I pressed the play button and it made music. And then they said, follow us. So, okay, I got up and followed them, and it took me out the departure lounge, out onto the tarmac. About that same time, a luggage cart was being wheeled by, and it was the one for our plane. And they walked right up to the luggage cart, stopped the worker who had it, and they walked right over to my suitcase. It was spooky. I didn't have to show them. They just walked right over to my suitcase. I was like, shit, they've been watching me.
So they weren't checking everyone. They were singling you. They were looking for you.
They were looking, exactly. My heart was pounding. And they said, open it. And I opened it. And they started rifling through it.
Where was the album?
In the suitcase, in the big suitcase, right? Stuff, just regular. You put it flat so it didn't get crushed. Yeah. They kind of took a look, but didn't catch their eye or anything. In Jamaica, you have what's called a waving gallery, where people are seeing you off on the plane, can kind of wave at you, and sometimes see you walking out to catch the plane. It's a good distance away, but you could see them. So my parents must have been up there on the waving gallery, seeing these policemen open my luggage and all that stuff.
Oh boy.
So they must have been worried as hell. And after looking for about 5 minutes, they said, okay, you can close it. So they let me continue on my way. I don't remember if I went back into the departure lounge or if I just climbed onto the plane or whatever. They let my suitcase go on up to be loaded. And I said, goodbye, sir.
And how did you feel when they let you go?
I didn't have much relief. I was so scared. I didn't feel safe. Even on the plane, even when the plane took off and I had all my stuff, I was... maybe it wasn't so much scared anymore, the adrenaline. My heart rate was sky high, and I couldn't relax. I just had to keep my cool and sit in the seat, but I was wound up like crazy. And I got to the other side of the flight, and I got to Newark Airport. I was still fairly wound up. I started breathing a little easier. When I got to the dorm at Princeton, I was calmer, but still not calm. And I managed to make a phone call from there to my parents didn't have a phone at all. So I was able to call my uncle in St. Anne, Jamaica, who had a phone, and say to him, please let my parents know I'm safe. But man, that was one of the scariest things I ever went through.
Yeah. What would have been the consequence if you'd been caught? What would have happened?
Well, certainly jail. Yeah, certainly jail. I was more worried about my parents because I was 16. I can't imagine too serious a jail sentence, or maybe just, but my parents would have been in deep trouble.
How did that shape you?
Well, I don't know if it shaped me much in any way, except keep a cool head is a good thing. But,
definitely.
It made me realize I was, somewhat able to keep a cool head, and many Jamaicans can keep a cool head, so I wasn't alone there. Yeah.
Ryan, what was it like for you to hear this story?
I loved hearing this story growing up. And I think it was always a little odd to me, actually, because, my father actually raised me to be quite sympathetic to the kind of political project that Michael Manley had undertaken in Jamaica. Things like Black Power, things like, again, all of the kinds of social transformations that my father was describing during this period. So in some ways, it was very odd that you were put in this position that on the one hand, at home, you're trying to sort of smuggle money out to escape the communist threat. And then at Princeton, you're encountering all of these new sort of spaces, the anti-apartheid movement, Black Power. So I think it always got me to think a lot about our family, about Caribbean history more broadly. In some ways, this might have been the basis for a lot of my interests in the history and politics of the region. What a potent story, right?
Yeah, yeah. Mark, do you remember which album it was?
I definitely do. It was an album by Jimmy Cliff, and it was called Jimmy Cliff Unlimited. Unlimited Jimmy Cliff.
Do you happen to still have it?
I do have it.
Do you ever listen to that album and think back on the experience?
Yeah, I do. I do. It doesn't give scary feelings, but yes, vivid. Those kind of memories stay very strong, very clear. Yeah.
I mean, it seems like it's a story that had a real impact on you and then generations with your son.
Right. The story will probably live on a couple more generations.
Under the sun, moon and stars.
Thank you so much for your time and sharing this chapter with us.
Thank all of you.
Thank you.
To me, I'm not blind, you see. I've got to be free under the sun, moon and stars. Under the sun.
That's it for this episode of the Storyworth Podcast. I'm Krista Baum. Thanks so much for listening. If you want to get started writing your own book of life stories or want to give the gift of Storyworth to a loved one, head over to storyworth.com. And if you want one of your stories to be considered for the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us at storyworth.com/podcast. The Storyworth Podcast was produced by the folks at Good Weight Productions. Remember, everyone has a story worth sharing. See you soon.